Yeah, like that's like my favorite place, by the way. Like, I
Oh,
love.
Cafe Strata.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dan, and joining us today is Ammar, one of our former students here, and we'll be just covering a whole bunch of stuff from, deciding on, how to choose your major, to, how to make the most out of your time after graduating high school. We were just chatting actually about if it weren't for the coronavirus, this would probably be a completely in-person thing happening at Cafe Strata, which is my favorite place to go. UC Berkeley, just to get a little bit of carrot cake and some white mocha. But I've had a lot of good conversations there, and today I don't think it's going to disappoint. We're going to have a great one with Ammar. But without further ado, Ammar, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hey everybody. Hope you're doing well. I know this is kind of a weird time with the whole pandemic going on. Not a lot of people go through this. But hopefully you're doing well. Anyway, so I'm Amar. I live in Newark, so pretty much the same thing. Very close to Fremont, obviously. For high school, I went to Moreau. So, if any of you guys played like sports or anything, we probably went up against you guys. Um and yeah, right now, so I just finished my freshman year at Berkeley, actually. Really happy with Berkeley, with all the opportunities there. And I'm intending to major in public health and minor in public policy. Yeah, definitely thinking of, some other things to add on as well, but we'll see how that goes. Let's see here. I'm also pre-med, so interested in med school, interested in healthcare. Um, so I might be able to give some insight on that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much a little bit about me.
Great, yeah. I mean, how about, let's start by walking us through a little bit, at high school, like, looking back on it, what were some key takeaways that you really kind of gained? And, now that you're obviously finishing up your freshman year at Cal, I'm sure you've had a lot of time to reflect, right? So I guess, looking back at it all, what are some I guess main lessons you've learned from it all, and maybe you can share with students who are still in high school or even their parents.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of my biggest regrets, I want to start with one of my regrets, is that I feel like, in high school, definitely like I took senior year, a little too seriously. Obviously, you should take it seriously, but I don't know. I should have enjoyed more, in like the graduation stuff and all that sort of thing. But um, I think, yeah, for me, high school, it was freshman and sophomore year were sort of a blur. I don't really remember too much. Um, uh, and then junior and senior year, that's when I started having, I think, a lot more fun, right? And sophomore and junior year, that's also when I sort of started thinking about, okay, what do I want to do after high school, right? So I started thinking about my passions. I was taking AP Bio at that time, so I was like, wow, this is really cool. um, so yeah, sophomore junior year, sort of just really enjoying it academically, but I definitely made sure to have fun throughout. I'm really glad I did. After all, high school is like it's after college, you don't get a lot of especially if you end up going to like grad school or whatever. You don't have a lot of time. You know, so I mean, my advice: definitely enjoy high school. Definitely enjoy it. To the fullest, make every single moment, but also, make sure to keep up your grades. Make sure to, go to sports and, keep fit and all that. Yeah, just balance everything. But yeah, overall, freshman and sophomore year, they're really great. I felt like I could have made, done some more things, but I was a little nervous. Didn't really get out of my comfort zone that much freshman, sophomore year. But again, junior and senior year, that's when I sort of really started putting myself out there. And I got to tell you, like, it feels really great. When you just, you have like this little bubble and you get out of it. Um, but yeah, those are some of my thoughts, some of my, I guess, reflections and experiences.
Now, one of the major challenges, I think, not only working with you, but certainly being you, was that you had a lot of different interests. And I think a lot of our students today would find this very relatable, right? And that, oftentimes I think society has this very interesting way of pushing us towards one major or one
Hmm.
job or one career track. And, just listening to what you're currently majoring in, at Cal, which is, majoring in public health and minoring in public policy, I mean, you're looking to basically not only kind of qualify yourself as pre-med, but also pre-law. And so, I think, your story is quite interesting, right? You've, on one hand, you've always kind of saw yourself going towards the realm of medicine. But on the other hand, you've always been keenly interested in like politics and economics and world affairs, as well as a plethora of other, interests as well. So, I guess tell the audience a little bit about how you kind of manage those different interests, especially during high school when you're trying to, create a niche profile. And, did you make time for other things that were not just, medically related or, pre-law related, for instance? But like, how did you kind of come to, I guess you can say, reconcile all your different interests, and how is that happening right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my first sort of interest that sort of came up, as I talked about a little bit earlier, was like medicine, right? So, I was really interested in bio and like chem. Science was really interesting for me, so that definitely or pushed me towards wanting to pursue medicine. But as 2016, the election has sort of really changed, I think, the political landscape in a lot of ways, and that was, I think, an eye opener, right? Is like I as an individual, but also as part of, a bigger sort of, system, has the power really to implement, I think, system-wide change. So yeah, that's sort of the genesis of my two interests. And I think so starting out, I wasn't really sure if, my politics and my policy, if that really was an interest or if that was sort of just a what I call, like an anomaly, right? Where I thought, oh, maybe it's just a thing that I'm gonna like for 2 months or something, and then I'm gonna be like, I don't care about it. Um, so I knew that, right, medicine was something I really wanted to do. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. So I sort of pursued that more, right, than politics and policy. But I think it's really important, to start out, if you might have a second interest or you might have a third interest, right? Start out small, right? You don't want to go like jump in the deep end. So start out small, maybe with like some sort of small project, or just like reading up articles, right? Sort of thinking about them. Um, and after I did that with politics, I decided, okay, maybe this is something real, right? This is something I really wanted to do. And so I sort of decided, okay, maybe I want to focus, a little bit of my time, maybe take a little bit of my time away from medicine, because that's what, the chunk of my, like projects and things have been focused towards, and devote it towards politics and policy. Um, so during high school, I was just like texting for some like Senate campaigns, and it was really interesting, right? Just getting to talk with voters, but also like discussing politics, with friends at school, teachers, etc. So I decided I wanted to do more with policy, right? So I sort of took a little bit more away from that medicine, in the sense that I gave more time to policy.
So
And
let's slow it down a little bit. I guess what about policy interested you, right? So what about medicine interested you, and then what
yeah,
about policy interested you that I guess satisfied something that medicine maybe perhaps could not alone.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
So for medicine is very much sort of an individualistic approach, where as a physician you're treating one patient at a time, or maybe a family of patients. But there's really no way, for you as a doctor to make any sort of system-wide changes, right, to affect large numbers of people at the same time. That'd just be pretty much impossible if you were just a doctor. So I think, policy and politics is a very powerful movement for making that change go to more people, right? To affecting more people. So that interplay between, you want to give people individual attention, but you also want to be able to, create a lot of change, right? To
yeah, that's
create
that's
change.
exactly kind of what I've realized. I think over the years, I have a lot of friends who are doctors, and whom many of are burnt out. Especially during today's current pandemic with coronavirus. I have actually a friend who's actually serving as a physician out in New York, and he was there during the hardest times.
Yeah.
Although that curve is really kind of nicely started to fade slowly away. But yeah, I think a lot of people when they think of medicine, they think of being a doctor, right? But very little, I've learned, very little attention is really kind of paid to research, right? Clinical trials,
Absolutely.
like for instance, like developing a vaccine or even a test that's scalably available for the coronavirus, we're not talking about saving one life at a time. We're talking about saving hundreds of thousands of lives, right? I mean, at this point, I think we're already at 102,000 people who have passed away, and that's more than practically every war that we've fought recently, all
Yeah.
combined. And so, I mean, tell us about it. I guess tell me about how you found out about public health, as an option, because I think when most people think of medicine, they're thinking about majoring in biology or they're thinking about majoring in
Yeah.
chemistry. But they don't typically know that there are other ways to pursue pre-med tracks without having to do those two things, right? How did you find out about public health?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that definitely helped me out was having, sort of, I think, a good mentor, right? Obviously I had one of your Ready Edge Go, consultants, Madhu. He was really great.
Co-founder, yeah.
And then I also had some family friends, that were, medical students and like doctors and stuff. So I think it's really important, one thing to remember, that pre-med isn't a major, right? It just happens so that a lot of people major in biology. Um, and then, but there, you could be an English major, a math major. I know someone who's engineering, someone who's music. It's really a really diverse set of majors, and that's great. So pre-med isn't necessarily about, for me, I knew that I wanted to be a doctor, right? And but I also knew I wanted to impact sort of, population, on a population level, right? Some change on a population level. And I was sort of looking into it, right? What major would allow me to do that best? And that's when I came to public health. Just a little bit of cursory research about the field. Um, just reading some articles about it. It sort of gave me insight. It's so wow, okay. Some people in public health, they work more on an individual level, and others, they're like epidemiologists, right? They work on a sort of a population level. So that's what gave me public health. I wanted to definitely work on both levels, and I definitely wanted to work with some sort of policy. And so one of the branches, I guess, of public health is health policy, which I'm really interested in. So yeah, from that I gained public health.
That's awesome. So what is it like right now, studying public health at Cal? What do your classes consist of? I mean, what are you doing? What are you learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Cal, I've been taking public health classes, as well as like some more my pre-med prerequisites, right? Like my biology, my chemistry, my physics. Um, I feel like, really the public health classes, and even just the intro, like, math, just to prepare you for it. Um, it really gets you thinking, the thing I really like is that it's all about application. So, whether it's applying, math problems to econ or public health situations, right? You're given the tools, and, you're given a situation, and you can apply those. And those come in handy, um, when you're working on projects, or when you're doing assignment, things of that nature. So yeah, in that sense, it's really eye-opening. um, and yeah, I think I'm really grateful. A lot. I'm just gonna give a little bit of a shout out to Cal. Um, some when I'm in the classroom, right? It's not so much as um I'm just sitting there in lecture, right, and a professor's lecturing. It's more like you're sort of, I think of it as absorbing the information, right, and fully sort of integrating it and using it in different ways. um so yeah, that's sort of how I feel, in classes, in those public health, and as well as those science classes. Yeah.
Now, a couple things we want to talk about today, I guess, especially one that's become really common in the age of, coronavirus, is how to stay productive. And especially this summer, right, as students are finishing off their school year, AP exams are over. Beyond just I think the cookie cutter test prep and, maybe taking a summer class, something that's become a lot more, you can say, popular is this idea of having a personal project. I think you had mentioned the idea of projects earlier today. Tell us a little bit about, like what projects you were involved in and, how you came up with them and also how you manage them, right? Because I think one
Yeah.
thing that the students aren't the best at is they can start a project, but, really kind of taking it further and to the point where it's actually producing something, more insight or whether that's insight or that's actually contribution to, the community. I find that a lot of students they think very heavily on starting a project, but not necessarily bringing it to, further success. So, what has been your involvement, I guess, with regards to projects, and what are your tips and advice for other students who are, thinking about starting their own?
Absolutely. Great questions. Yeah. So back in high school, one of my projects that I was really, I guess, sort of interested in and passionate about was my policy work, right? So I had basically my premise, I guess my motivation for starting this project was that so I wanted to get into policy, do something policy related. But policy is like sort of one of those fields where it might be a little sort of tough to crack
So
at
back in
a
high
high school
school,
level.
one of my
You just don't have like that much experience, and people like you just don't have much education, frankly. So my thinking was, okay, how do I bring policy, to the point where I can really make change? And one sort of avenue for that was my local representative. So my state assembly member, Kenson Chu of the 25th district. Um, I reached out to some of his staff. I was like, would it be cool if I sort of developed like some ideas for some policy proposals, right? And I sort of flesh them out, and I'd give like numbers, and I'd put data, put again sources that would sort of rebut it, right? I'd make an argument essentially, and I'd present it to him right at his community meetings, and we just sort of talk through the issues, talk through the pitfalls and the pros and the cons, and
But you
you
would
know
present verbally, like you would actually present orally, or was
yeah
there kind of
sort
a written component too?
yeah,
Yeah.
sort of. Yeah, absolutely. I sort of, I just had, a piece of paper, two pieces of paper, one for him, one for me. And I would sort of just talk through my ideas, right? I just sit there and talk to him for the allotted, 20 minutes or so. And from that, I didn't actually, get any of my ideas, in the California State Assembly or pass as a bill or anything like that. But
Sure.
even just, starting the conversation, right? And just talking it out, you gain, a lot of insight into the process, right? Because there's some stuff that you just can't search up on the internet, he talked a lot about the ways, I guess the breakdown between more moderate and more liberal Democrats in the assembly, right? And what bills he thought could get through, what bills he thought he couldn't. So it was just, I guess, really interesting to learn about that. Um and I think the thing that kept me going was just that um you know, I was learning so much,
is,
like a lot
I
of
guess the
a
breakdown
lot of the
between,
stuff you can't really search up on like Wikipedia or stuff, especially because, state politics aren't super advertised. So I was here, with what is essentially a free resource, right? I mean, the only thing it cost me was a little bit of my time and the gas to get to the meeting place. Um, but yeah, I was able to talk through them, and that's sort of what kept me going was that wow, I was having these conversations. Maybe this could go into something bigger. It eventually didn't, but that's okay. It was a learning experience, and that's what's really important for me.
And so what came out of it, I guess, was that the project itself, or did you, end up, writing other, policy proposals or things like that, And then granted, you said obviously it didn't go through to the assembly, but, at least you tried, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what sort of solidified, or what benefited me from that experience was that I gained, I think, an appreciation of policy, right? So that was sort of like, okay, wow, this is something I really want to do. This is something super cool. And it laid the foundation for other projects, right? So one of the projects I also started later on was a blog, right? It was at the beginning, it was more of like a medicine focused blog, very anatomy heavy, very sort of along that track. But gradually I started working into public health, and gradually that turned into like healthcare policy, right? and that went into looking at Medicare and looking at the effects of this regulation and that regulation, right? So it was a learning experience for me, but it also really set the foundation that this is an interest I want to do. So in my idea, in my sort of way of thinking, that's kind of the purpose of personal projects, right? You have an interest. If you can start some sort of project, just jot down a few ideas, right? And then if that project is something, even if it necessarily doesn't produce like some sort of outcome, right, that you can like put on an app or whatever, um, it might show you that wow, this interest is something cool. And if you're finding that it's really difficult to just find the motivation to continue a personal project on a new interest, maybe that interest is more of a smaller interest, right? Maybe it's not as big as you thought it might have been. So I think that's a great, I guess, way of using personal projects, right? To see, if your interest is more of a larger interest or a smaller interest, if it's more of a hobby, a casual interest, what sort of what classification it is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, talking about the degree, right, of interest. And I think it's really important to test that, It's
Yeah.
important because I think we all have so many different interests. Like right now, I'm taking like an ancient Greek history class and learning conversational Spanish on the side, to even like learning, landscaping and gardening techniques. So many different things, but the degree to which we pursue them can vary. And I think that's a really good point in that I think oftentimes for instance, like parents ask their students, like, hey, what's your passion, right? And I think that's jumping like so many, they say jumping the gun. That's so premature, right? Because I think a lot of people haven't yet vetted, right,
Yeah.
their interests, and they haven't yet determined, I think, perhaps, or even accumulated the proper amount of exposure. Note the word proper there is because I think a lot of people get the wrong idea of what something is if they've given a bad exposure to an interest. But point is, a lot of people don't have the data to really determine what exactly do I like and how much do I like it, right? And
Exactly.
I think you're absolutely right when you say, look, if you find yourself having a hard time, getting motivated for a personal project that you started, it's probably an indication that one, this is not a strong interest for you. Perhaps it was something you just wanted to kind of learn a little bit about and get out. On the flip side, I think it's also entirely possible if you're losing motivation, it's probably because you're finding it difficult. And I think that's slightly different. I think if you're
Yeah.
finding it difficult, then you have to be honest with yourself as okay, well, what is difficult and how do I overcome that, right? And I think there's two ways to do that. One is to obviously gain the skills necessary to overcome the difficulty, right? Or you can imagine there being a wall and it's like finding the right sledgehammer that you can just tear down the wall. Or sometimes it's a little bit too daunting to do on your own, and that's why I really recommend people when they think about personal projects, it's really good to collaborate with somebody, right? Whether that's a mentor with greater knowledge who can then give you that sledgehammer, or maybe it's just tell you actually there's just another way around. You're looking at the wrong wall, all right? You're at the wrong destination. Or it could just be, team members and group partners. I think a lot of people, especially in like the Silicon Valley, they're very obsessed with like competing against each other, that they oftentimes
Mhm.
forget that you actually should rather be collaborating with other people, ideally that you can trust
Exactly.
and you like, and that are also competent, because that actually ends up looking better. I mean, colleges want to see teamwork, right? They don't want to see self-serving people who, just want to kind of take all the glory for themselves, right? So when it comes to personal projects, I feel like people, it's very easy to I think to kind of go like you can say not even halfway, but like a quarter way and stop. But that self-diagnosis process I think is what we're talking about right now, right? Which is like,
Absolutely.
do you just call it? Is this just a light interest, right? For instance, or is it more so okay? This is hard, right? And then I think it's important to delineate the two, or else I think you can end up making the wrong stoppage, if you will, right? So that's really cool. Well, I mean, the next thing that I'm curious, really, you mentioned this a while ago. I think it was like a couple weeks ago when we were talking on the phone. You mentioned like, if you were to do, I guess the time over again after graduating high school, right? So obviously right now, a lot of seniors are graduating high school, and even though they don't get the traditional ceremony, high school's practically over, right? And you know, what if you were to kind of go back in your own life, which was I think about what, a year ago exactly, you know, what did you do and what would you have done differently, I guess?
Yeah. Um, so one thing I definitely would have, I think, made some effort to learn in the summer, in the transition summer, was how to do laundry. Um, like, I'm not joking. Like it takes a while. But I guess something a little more serious. I think the
Yeah.
summer, you know, between high school and college is really your opportunity to sort of maybe, you know, look into a different interest, right? Because, you know, you don't have to worry about college apps, those are done. And, you
Right.
know, even if your personal project, you know, goes like horribly wrong or whatever, um, you know, college, you know, isn't really going to be affected by that. So that's
Yeah.
really the optimal time, right? To so if you want to do like some sort of internship that you just never got time to do, or you know, if you want to again just do some type of personal project, I think that you just never got time to do, or you know, maybe you were a little hesitant to do, right? Um, that was the perfect time. Um, but I think definitely more than anything, just sort of relax, right? You know, college is it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. You
Mm.
have to make sure you know you're well rested, or you're just gonna be burnt out before you get there. So take it easy, but you know, definitely also you know look for ways to pique your interest, right? You don't have you know if you really don't want to, you don't have to like just sit on the couch and watch TV all day. You
Yeah,
can
and you don't, you know, and I think that's an interesting thing. I was a guest speaker for a department at Thermo Fisher, which is like, you know, a really big biotech company
Mhm,
wide. Just a few days ago, I was invited to speak as a, you know, for their Women's Empowerment Resource Group, WRG. And what I talked about at that meeting was, you know, kind of just like how to, you know, how to kind of just eliminate your limiting beliefs. Because I think, you know, a lot of people right now are thinking, oh, well, that's great. But, you know, this coronavirus is still a thing, right?
yeah,
What can I even do if I can't even go out, you know, and all these regulations and policies, and certainly even employers are more reluctant. You know, a lot of people think that like the world is almost kind of frozen, and it's not just not true. I mean, I think in the last, I would say, you know, 4 or 5 months since, you know, the world started really recognizing it as a threat, I've really learned so much. I mean, like my life is so dynamic, it's crazy. I mean, in fact, not a single day is the same for me. And it's like, well, if you're just graduating high school, you have so much time on your hands that it's like the last thing that you should probably be doing is absolutely nothing with it or squandering it, right? Entirely to Netflix. And I'm not opposed to Netflix. I think that has its place in our relaxation. But at
yeah,
the same time,
absolutely.
it's like, you know, we should probably be, you know, doing things that to also help us see more of the world and help us grow. I mean, you know, and what are those things that you could be doing? It could really be anything. But you know, some real life examples from my own life. You know, one, I hadn't learned Spanish since, you know, college, and so it's been for me, you know, and it's funny because I travel the world all the time. This year is actually supposed to go to Argentina, as well as Barcelona and Porto as well. But you know, I mean, it's like, well, you know, with the extra, say, 20 minutes even of saved time of driving, right, the commute, I can just pop open my phone and start learning some Spanish, right? And that, you know, literally takes me about 5 or 10 minutes a day. What's that, right? But if you accumulate that over time, and I'm sure a lot of people here are good at math, but let's just say it's 10 minutes a day for 365 days. That's, you know, that's 3,650 minutes of
Very true.
consistent Spanish learning. Right? And so, you know, you know, that's something that I hadn't done in quite a long time. But now that I'm traveling, it's like I'm using it, right? I see the use in it. I know why. Now I'm motivated again to learn it. Recently, you know, also just learning to become self-sufficient has been a huge thing. You know, being able to learn about, you know, soil conditioning and, you know, root health versus, you know, fruit trees versus, you know, flowers, and understanding, you know, just all that, right, with regards to like plants and life, how to almost, you know, start life from a seed, quite literally, has been amazing. You know, if you had told me that I would enjoy plucking weeds when I was like 16 or 17, I would have been like, no way, right? That used to be punishment for me. If I did something bad, my dad would say, hey, time to go pluck some weeds, you know, for half an hour. But now I enjoy doing it, right? Because I'm cleaning up. You know, for me, it's a very artistic process, but it's also a very scientific one. right? Because planning, for instance, like a flower bed or a garden is you have to be meticulous, and on top of that, you also have to plan well, right? Use the scientific method in many ways, experiment, right? Know your stuff. But there's just so much to learn, and I think the biggest mistake a lot of students make, and I think just in general people, is they kind of just like, okay, here are my interests that I have already had, right? And here are the things I like, I don't like. And then typically what happens, it's weird, is I think that interest of things I don't like happens to somewhat include the things I haven't yet tried, right? It's like almost as if like we've found our equilibrium, like by the time we're like 18, and then we're now too stubborn to like try new things. And then we wonder why our parents are so boring, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes it's like, how did you get that way? It's
very
like, well,
true.
you're becoming that way
I
right
will
now.
say,
You're
yeah,
not trying new things and you're not getting out there and learning. So, I find it really interesting what you said about, I think like those things that you maybe haven't yet given a shot at, even if that's something that you perhaps had a negative predisposition towards. I think it's still worth giving it a shot.
absolutely.
And summer after high school, you're right. I think it's you don't have any pressure, right? And since you're stuck at home, it's like, well, what better time to just to kind of try something new, right? Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. And
yeah,
I think it's really important. One thing I want to say, it's really important though not to get too overburdened, right? You don't want to get too overburdened. You don't want to have your mental health suffer. Already this is a crazy time. So just sort of, do what you can. And that's absolutely that's good enough. Yeah.
completely agree with that. And I guess I'll add to that by saying in English they call it the rule of threes, right? Which is whenever you're dealing with like a list, you don't want to go over three, or you also don't want to go less than three because it's then underwhelming. But three
Hmm.
happens, in my opinion, what I found is like cognitively, I think we're generally able to like handle and thrive and do well and great at, I think, any three things at any given time, right? So like for instance, I tell my students who are looking at the summer, it's like, okay, great, yeah, summer class one, two, maybe a personal project, and three, like apps. Anything additional to that would be like, you're probably likely going to only do okay, right? You're probably going to lose motivation, right?
Exactly.
And something else now if you're adding four, five, six things to your plate, and then you're probably going to get burnt out. A lot of people don't talk about it, but you had alluded to it. But like a lot of people, they work so hard during high school, and then they go to college with kind of that same mindset of grind, 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 and they get to college and they realize it's actually even harder to grind there
Yep.
versus at high school, because you're dealing with not just the top kids from your city or your current area. You're
Your
dealing with the
state.
top kids from the world,
Yeah.
and so if you're still in that competition mindset purely and you're just trying to grind it out, I mean, no one really talks about it, but man, it happens all the time where people they drop out of Berkeley, all the time. In fact, I'm really good friends with the head of engineering, and in fact, I even worked with his daughter. But he would tell me about how common it was for students to drop out of computer science like all the time, because it was a lot harder than they thought it would be. Right? They came in here thinking they could just grind it out, but they couldn't. So, to your point about resting,
Yeah.
that's a great one, and I want to kind of reiterate that. Oftentimes we schedule time for classes, we schedule time for projects, we schedule time
Hmm.
for clubs, but we don't schedule time to just rest.
Yeah.
And I learned that myself. Even during like my time working at Google, my time working in general. It's like we're very good at calendaring things, but we don't oftentimes calendar like break. So yeah, that's an excellent point. But yeah, was there anything else you wanted to kind of add? Because we're kind of finishing up today's shot.
I think, just if I were to leave you with one sort of, lingering thought, um, do what you love, but I guess don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone, right? It's very easy, to just be like, for like in my instance, just medicine and politics and that's it. But no, I've actually found that I have a mini interest in, like the environment, right? And like renewables. And so I love reading articles and, I love just sort of, lazily browsing through like New York Times or whatever. So I mean, you're never done learning, right? So um as long as you're well rested, you're exercising, you're healthy, definitely take the time to learn, take the time to relax. And I think yeah, definitely be, this is just great advice, I think, for whatever stage in life you're in. This was actually from a TED talk I heard. Um, never be or learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? So you're always going to be in uncomfortable situations one way or the other. Just learn how to adapt, and that makes you a better person from it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Amar. It's been awesome, and for those of you still tuning in, we'll fill in everyone in on this later. But Amar is actually more than happy to provide some advice, in somewhat of a mentorship capacity. So we'll be making sure to if you're a student or even you are interested in kind of talking with him and learning, maybe just having your student chat with him to learn more about what how to approach this pre-med thing, or maybe how to get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I think we'll be posting Amar's contact info so you guys can just get chatted. And I think while mentorship is something that we provide here, and it's mostly a one-on-one program. I mean, the truth is we mentorship happens I think everywhere in ways. They say it takes a village. And I think Ammar is a student who, received mentorship from us, to come back and now, offer his time to other students who are still in high school, is just a testament to the fact that he's become, a village member, so to speak.
Thank you.
Again, thanks for your time and wisdom. I'm sure this won't be the last, but yeah, I look forward to the next time already.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be back.
All right, I'll